I am Laura Dixon, and you are listening to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast, episode number 116, Freedom with Decisions in Advance. Welcome to the Naturally Thin for Life podcast. I'm going to teach you how to get out of your diet brain so that you too can be naturally thin for life. No counting, restricting, or obsessing. I am going to take the mystery out of it for you so that you can become naturally thin starting today. Are you ready? Let's do this. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited for you to dive right in. I am doing a webinar about how to make your habit brain naturally thin again. Because we're all born with naturally thin habit brains. We just override and teach our habit brain to be something else. And so I'm doing this webinar and I've been thinking a lot about how to articulate and share with all of you the power of retraining your habit brain to become naturally thin. And so if you didn't attend the webinar, it probably was before you hear this episode. So we will have done it before this episode goes live. And if you weren't there, make sure you get our emails because that's how we communicate a lot of our webinars and free trainings and things that we do outside of the podcast that I don't always talk about on the podcast. So head over to lauradixoncoaching.com and make sure you are getting those emails and so that you can come to any of these that we have in the future. So I want to share the premise of that training, that webinar, and really teach you the power of your habit brain and how to have so much freedom when you know how to make decisions in advance and follow through on those decisions. So right now, if you are counting calories, obsessing about exercising, obsessing about what food you're eating and how many calories you should be eating and worried about what macros to fit in, then your habit brain right now, if that's you, your habit brain is simultaneously a diet brain and rebelling against a diet brain. And so there is a difference between rebelling against something you don't really want to be doing long term, something your future self doesn't want, or something that isn't sustainable, like counting and dieting, and really using someone else's way of eating and trying to force that onto yourself. So that's kind of rebelling against something you don't want to do long term. And then there's going to be the discomfort of retraining your habit brain. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And specifically in the context of making decisions in advance that you know you really truly want to follow through on, right? Making the decision in advance of, like, when I used to wake up in the morning having had binged the night before or overeaten a lot the night before. And I would wake up in the morning and make a quote unquote decision in advance of, I'm just not going to eat anything today, or I'm only going to eat 300 calories today, or like some crazy restriction that my mind would be like, this is how I have to counteract the overeating from the night before. I would make that decision in advance. That's not the decision in advance I'm talking about, because that wasn't truly in my long-term best interest. That wasn't a naturally thin decision. That was a rebellious diet brain decision. So right now, your brain probably has a habit brain that is a diet brain and a rebellious diet brain. And there are two parts of your brain. So when we talk about decisions in advance, I want you to have in the back of your mind this context. So there are two parts of your brain that we're going to talk about today: your prefrontal cortex and your habit brain. Your habit brain, right, is the part of your brain that houses your habits. It's this amazing part of your brain that sees what you do over and over and over again, sees how you think over and over again, and how you feel over and over again, and the behaviors you do over and over again. And it's like, great, I'm going to help you be really efficient with these things, and I'm going to put them in your habit brain so that you don't have to think about them, right? Like getting in the car and putting on your seatbelt, brushing your teeth. Your default thinking, your over and over again thinking, tucks away into your habit brain. And it may be because of how you grew up It may be because of things that you've just decided to do over and over again, or ways that you've trained yourself to think and be. Your habit brain is designed to help you out. It's designed to serve you so that you don't have to spend mental energy thinking about the things that you, quote unquote, habitually do. You are born with a naturally thin brain. You are born with a habit brain that is already naturally thin. One that only thinks about food when you are hungry, that already has all of the cues and knows how to interpret food that serves you and how to easily stop eating when you are satisfied. We see it in infants and we see it in little kids until they learn otherwise. As soon as you start deviating from your naturally thin habit brain and you start overeating, or maybe you learn how to use food as a reward system, or you learn to use food as a distraction, right? Think about how often we see parents giving kids food as a way to keep them quiet, right? We learn that as very little kids. And so then maybe we learn that, and then as we grow up, we want to lose some weight. So then we start restricting, and then we start dieting. And so our habit brain is like, okay, you seem to be doing that restricting, binging thing over and over again. It's thinking, okay, you seem to be doing that thing where you eat donuts every Saturday morning, right? It seems like you are doing that thing where you exercise and then you reward yourself with food afterwards. It seems to be doing that thing where you feel anxious, and then as a way to solve your anxiety, you eat. Your habit brain is like on the lookout to find the things that you keep doing over and over and over again. So if you obsess every morning about the number on the scale, your habit brain is like, all right, that's just what we do. When you tell yourself over and over again, today's the day, right? Your habit brain is like, oh, that's right. Every morning at 6 o'clock, we tell ourselves today is the day. Or you say, I will start again tomorrow. Or the weekend doesn't matter. I'm going to start again on Monday. Or you eat crackers with peanut butter every night at 10 p.m., right? Your habit brain is like, I'm going to help you by finding all of the things you do over and over again, and I'm going to make them a habit. And your habit brain does not differentiate between habits you want and those you don't want. It just goes to work to make them happen for you automatically. So, probably safe to say you have some habits you don't want in both the way you eat and how you think about food. And so when you understand that your habit brain wants to help you out, your habit brain started naturally thin. You just developed habits either from how you were raised or your diet, patterning, or the way that you just have been in your life unconsciously. You can retrain your habit brain to come back to being naturally thin, because that's actually how your body is like craving for you to think. Your body is like, please, can we be back to our naturally thin thinking again? And here's where the freedom and the power of decisions in advance come from. So when you understand that that's what your habit brain is doing, your habit brain is designed to find habits and make them run on autopilot so you don't have to spend mental energy on them. When you understand that that's one part of your brain, but then you also have this amazing other part of your brain called your prefrontal cortex. It's the part of your brain that thinks about the future. It's the part of your brain that can imagine your life when you're naturally thin. It's the part of your brain that has your best interests in mind. When you make decisions in advance, you use your prefrontal cortex to tap back into the part of your brain that knows you want to be naturally thin. It's the part of your brain that doesn't want to obsess forever. It's the part of your brain that wants to feel calm and make friends with hunger and never fear it. It's the part of your brain that knows what foods you enjoy eating that allow you to feel nourished and light and energized. It's the part of your brain that knows you feel so good when you stop eating when you're satisfied. It's the part of your brain that genuinely never wants to experience the discomfort of overeating ever again. And so when you make decisions in advance, you are using your naturally thin prefrontal cortex. And then when you follow through on those decisions, you're training your habit brain to become a naturally thin brain again. And here's the thing, right? So many of us can have these great intentions, right? Yes, we can make decisions in advance with our naturally thin prefrontal cortex. And then when you get to that moment where you follow through on that decision, your habit brain won't want to right away. Your habit brain, its job is to keep doing the same thing you've always done, even though it doesn't serve you. And your habit brain responds to the emotion that you are in that moment. But when you know how to allow an emotion to be there without fighting it, without responding to it, without shoving it down, all of a sudden you can feel very in control of whatever your habit brain is telling you. You get to feel in control of the restlessness, of the anxiety, of feeling annoyed and frustrated. And when you feel in control and you can calm that down, all of a sudden you get to follow through on the decision you made in advance, thinking about how hungry you wanted to be before you eat, the food that serves you, how you want to feel when you're done eating. And when you follow through on that decision because you simply allow the emotion to be there that your habit brain offers up to you, and you follow through, all of a sudden your habit brain learns, oh, okay, this is what we're doing instead. This is why I teach you the tool called the buckets in the Naturally Thin for Life program. And I've talked about it briefly here, but it's because it's how you make your habit brain become naturally thin again. And especially for those of you that have an analytical mind. The analytical mind wants to trust your body, but it needs a step-by-step process to be able to do that. So when you're using this tool called your buckets, you're using your naturally thin prefrontal cortex to decide, okay, how hungry do I want to be before I eat? What feels good in my body? What food do I want to eat that allows me to feel the way I want to feel when I'm done, that allows me to lose the weight I want to feel, that allows me to feel nourished and light and energized, but I know the same food also allows me to enjoy eating it because it tastes good. When you make those decisions in advance, you're using your naturally thin prefrontal cortex. It's how you're teaching your habit brain to become naturally thin again. You're telling your habit brain, this is the way that we think about food. This is the way we think about hunger. This is the way we think about being satisfied. And then when you're in that moment, and you decided in advance you were going to eat when you were at a hunger level of an 8, let's say, and you decided I'm going to eat this soup that I know intellectually with my naturally thin prefrontal cortex tastes good. I'm the one that made it. I decided it feels so good, but your habit brain comes roaring in and is like, but this isn't what we're used to. We want to eat the pizza that we know is going to not feel so good in our body. Right? It's in that moment when you know how to allow the emotion that your habit brain wants to respond to, that is how you rewire your habit brain to become naturally thin without needing willpower, without forcing it on yourself. And as you make these decisions in advance and you follow through on them by making those decisions with your naturally thin prefrontal cortex, your habit brain, this amazing part of your brain that wants to help you out, your habit brain then goes, oh, okay, I guess that old way of thinking, that old way of eating isn't what we're doing anymore. Now we're doing this naturally thin thing again. And your body is actually rewarding your brain with the feedback of telling your brain, hey, I'm feeling so good. I enjoy this. I'm feeling so light and energized, and I love this way that I feel in my body. It actually helps your habit brain get on board so much more quickly. And so then this amazing part of your brain, your habit brain, is like, all right, this is just what we're doing. And so then this part of your brain, your habit brain, actually becomes naturally thin again. This is how you never think about food unless you're hungry, because you've trained your brain to actually not think about food unless you're hungry. You've trained your brain to not obsess. You've trained your brain to not need to count calories or macros or grams of sugar. You've trained your habit brain to be naturally thin. It's how your brain was designed to think and feel, and how your body is designed to eat. And so when you make these decisions in advance, the point is to retrain your habit brain so that then what runs on autopilot is simply your naturally thin thinking, feeling, and eating. This is also why mainstream intuitive eating doesn't work for many of us. I tried it and I've shared a little bit on the podcast about how I was eating cookie dough like 3 times a day, because intuitive eating without decisions in advance, intuitive eating is eating what you want in the moment, and it's responding to your habit brain emotions. And those habit brain emotions, when you have a habit brain that's either a diet brain and or rebelling against diets, that habit brain will offer up to you thoughts that don't serve you long term. Like, I don't care, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. Enter cookie dough. Hence, I'm going to eat whatever I want. Enter pizza or fast food or bread when maybe your body doesn't feel good with bread, right? Whatever it is, when you are trying to eat whatever you want in the moment without retraining your habit brain to be naturally thin first, it's never going to end up well. But when your habit brain becomes naturally thin again, then you can trust yourself to make those decisions in the moment. But you must retrain your habit brain first by using your prefrontal cortex that wants you to be naturally thin, making those decisions in advance. And then in the moment, if and when your habit brain doesn't want to follow through, you simply allow that emotion and you continue on and you follow through on your naturally thin food decisions. All of a sudden, your habit brain will be aligned with your naturally thin thinking and eating. I was coaching a woman this past week inside of Naturally Thin for Life, and she was asking me about her relationship with chocolate. She said every Lent, and for those of you that don't know, Lent is the 6 weeks before Easter, which is the day that Christians celebrate when Jesus rose from the dead. And the 6 weeks preceding Easter is a time called Lent, in which you often give up something. You make a sacrifice as a way to grow in your relationship with God. And when I was growing up, we celebrated Lent and Easter, and it was often like what I want to say is like a diet time. It was a way that many people would give up a food that they wanted to not want. So people would give up maybe alcohol or give up chips or give up chocolate or give up something they really enjoyed. But there was this kind of, I'm like giggling, but it was like this underlying tone of, I'm going to use this as a really good way to stop eating something that I wish I didn't eat in the first place. But anyways, this woman in Naturally Thin for Life was saying, I give up chocolate during Lent. She said, I make a decision and I know I'm going to follow through on it and I just don't think about it and I have so much freedom then. And there is so much freedom in making a decision and just knowing you're going to follow through on it and being done. But she said, but then after Lent is the problem. I get back to eating it and eating more than she wanted to eat. And so I want to make 2 points with this example. First, she has the freedom because she knows she made a decision and she knows she's going to follow through on that decision. It's the same with using the buckets that I teach you and that we really dive into much deeper inside the program. But it's a way for the analytical mind to learn to trust your body's cues because you make decisions, you make naturally thin decisions with your prefrontal cortex around how hungry you want to be before you eat, how you want to feel when you're done eating, and then what food allows for that. The point of the buckets is to make those naturally thin food decisions in advance because then you're using your naturally thin prefrontal cortex and then you follow through on them by simply allowing the emotion that comes up that your habit brain offers up to you in that moment of follow through. And allowing your emotion isn't a willpower thing, it's an allowance and there's a peacefulness to it. And then what happens is your habit brain learns that the old thinking and the old habits, that you're simply not doing them anymore. And it lets go of them. And your habit brain becomes naturally thin. And then here's the other magic of this. You trust yourself to make decisions and follow through on them because you know that once you've decided them and they're in your long-term best interest and you're the one that made that decision and you know the only thing between you and the follow-through is an emotion and you have the skill of calmly allowing any emotion to pass through you, you have the freedom of knowing you can make a decision in advance and follow through. And then your habit brain becomes so quickly your naturally thin brain. So it's like the example of this woman saying, I decide I'm just not going to eat chocolate for 6 weeks, and I trust myself to follow through on that. I get that freedom. And it's the same thing when you're retraining your habit brain to become naturally thin, because you make decisions in advance and then you build this trust with yourself that you know you're going to follow through on these decisions that really serve your long-term best interest, right? And again, I'm not talking about like my example earlier where I would wake up in the morning and say, nope, I'm just not going to eat today, or I'm only going to eat 500 calories today. Like, that's not a naturally thin prefrontal cortex decision. That's a habit brain rebelling decision. So you make decisions in advance and you build up the trust with yourself that you know that you're going to follow through on them, because you know you're going to feel so good on the other side of the follow through. And because you know that all it takes to follow through is easily allowing an emotion. And there's always another meal coming up where you can make a different decision. So when you've decided in advance, you've made the advanced decision of I'm going to eat when I'm in a hunger level of an 8, and I know I want to feel energized, but also maybe a little warm today. So I'm going to eat this soup that I made that's in the refrigerator that I love and it tastes so good. When you get to the moment of following through on that decision and your habit brain is like, no, I don't want to eat this amazing soup I made for myself that I intellectually know tastes so good and I'm going to feel so nourished and satisfied after. When your habit brain has like this little temper tantrum, right? That is different than rebelling against a strict diet, right? Because a diet is someone else's rules you're trying to impose on yourself that deep down you know isn't actually how you want to live and eat forever. So when you rebel on a diet, that usually comes from restriction and deprivation. Versus when your habit brain throws a little fit because you're simply retraining it to become naturally thin. It's not the same as rebelling on a diet. And when you get to the moment where you've decided in advance that you want to eat this amazing soup that's in your refrigerator, when you get to a hunger level of an 8, because you know you're going to feel so good, you get to that moment and your habit brain is like, no. I don't want to eat this amazing soup I made for myself that I intellectually know tastes good. I feel nourished and satisfied and warm afterwards. Is exactly how I want to feel. But your habit brain is like, throws up a little temper tantrum. It's different than rebelling against a diet, because a diet is someone else's rules that you're trying to impose on yourself and your body. And deep down, you know it's not how you want to live and eat forever. So when you rebel on a diet, that usually comes from restriction and deprivation, but it's living in your habit brain. Versus when you've made a decision in advance with your naturally thin prefrontal cortex, and then your habit brain throws a little fit simply because you're retraining it to become naturally thin. All that happens in that moment is there's an emotion that you experience that when you have the skill of allowing that emotion, you can peacefully follow through on your naturally thin decision, and your habit brain learns, this is what we're doing. It's like switching lanes, turning your habit brain and teaching your habit brain to simply switch lanes versus rebelling against a diet, which is something you don't really want to do in the first place. Retraining your habit brain is something that has some discomfort involved, but only because it's a way of thinking that isn't what's running on autopilot right now. And the way through that discomfort is by allowing the emotional discomfort that comes with that. And that's not fighting it. That's not willpowering. That's not forcing yourself through it. It's by learning the skill of allowing the emotion that comes up when your habit brain isn't aligned with your naturally thin brain. And rather than going down the road of following your habit brain and your diet thinking and your rebellious diet thinking, rather than doing that, you allow the emotion that comes up and you tap right back into your naturally thin brain. And then all of a sudden, your habit brain learns, this is just what we're doing now. It's how you say goodbye to a diet brain. It's how you say goodbye to rebelling against a diet brain. And it's how you say hello to a naturally thin habit brain that then just gets to run on autopilot and serve you for the rest of your life. The second thing I wanted to mention when I was sharing with you that I was coaching the woman that was giving up chocolate for Lent is that she said, well, yeah, I'm usually all back in on the chocolate though after Lent, right? There's the initial freedom and relief she gets by quote unquote giving it up. But then she doesn't want to have this like strong longing for it as soon as it's quote unquote allowed to come back into her life. The key to having the relationship with chocolate or any food is to understand what your habit brain's thoughts are about it. What's the default thinking that's just running in the background in your habit brain? Why do you have the desire for it in the first place? And then consciously decide if you want to keep thinking those thoughts. And you're able to do this when you know how to feel the emotion of desire in your body and not respond to it. Your habit brain offers you desire for the chocolate out of habit. And then you reinforce the desire with the reward of eating the chocolate. So think about like your habit brain is like, we like chocolate. It's so good. It's so tasty. It's so creamy. It's so relaxing. All the things your habit brain tells you about chocolate. It offers that up to you. It creates the emotion of desire. You go into the cabinet, you eat the chocolate, and it's like you get this dopamine reward in your brain that's like, yep, we love the chocolate. And so it just keeps running on autopilot for you, right? Every night. It's just like, love the chocolate, love the chocolate. Right? Which is totally fine, by the way. I eat chocolate every night, right? But when you have an over desire for it or a desire for chocolate or X, Y, and Z, fill in whatever food for you, when you have an over desire for it that doesn't serve you, you want to understand why that's there so that you can retrain your habit brain to have the exact desire for it that does serve you. So when it's Lent though, and you quote unquote give up the chocolate and you have that temporary freedom, here's what's kind of happens. It's like you've just shoved the desire for it in the closet and told yourself, I'll deal with it later. And then tomorrow you have more desire and you shove it in a box and you put that in the closet. And then the next day you have more desire and then you shove it in the closet too. And then the next day you have more desire and you're like, I'm going to put it in a box and tape wrap it and like put it in the closet too. And then the next day more desire and you're like, I'm going to hang this up on the coat rack in the closet. And you just keep shoving more and more of that desire in the closet. You think you have the freedom, and you temporarily sort of do because only you tell yourself, I'm going to deal with this later. But then Lent ends, or for you, if it's maybe a fasting period, or maybe it's while you're pregnant. I remember I had this experience with wine. It was like, oh, well, now I'm not going to drink wine for 9 months, but I still had the desire for it. And it would be just like accumulating in the closet. And then the closet becomes so full of the desire, it's like bursting at the seams that the door breaks down as soon as Lent ends. And it all comes pouring back out. And now it's a big mess and you're overflowed with desire. So it really only is like a false freedom then in that moment. But when you can feel the emotion of desire without responding to it, you have control over it. Because then you can understand it. You understand what is going on in my brain that's creating that desire because you know how to feel it without responding to it and without using willpower. Then you either get to make a choice to keep that thought pattern or actually change it. And that is how you harness the power of your habit brain. Knowing how to allow emotion is the fastest way to retrain your brain. It's the fastest way to make your habit brain serve you and do the things you actually want it to be doing. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is how amazing and magical this skill can be in so many areas of your life, not just food and thinking the way you want to when you're naturally thin. I was recently reading a book by Benjamin Hardy. I'm 99% sure it's called Why Willpower Doesn't Work, but essentially that's what it is about. Why willpower doesn't work. It doesn't actually create long-term solutions and long-term success. And in there, he was talking about eliminating choices and how we think more choices is more freedom, but actually less choices creates more freedom because we don't waste our brain power then on making small, inconsequential decisions. And we can then instead use that brain power and focus it on being more productive and on decisions that are maybe more important and on higher level problem solving. I remember actually my coach and mentor, Brooke Castillo, saying something along these lines about like just not having choices, especially in areas of her life where like just didn't matter. Like for a period of her time, I remember her saying like she just shopped at one store. She knew she liked the clothes. They all went together. And she was like, I just don't spend any mental energy thinking about other stores. And then I remember her saying something along the lines of like, I just use Apple products. Like all the products and the technology I have for my computer and my laptop and my phone and all the accessories, she's like, it's just Apple. I just don't even entertain anything else. And she was just saying there's so much freedom in that because I just don't entertain all of the choices that we have. And I think especially all of the choices that we have nowadays. And this is also why it's so powerful to use your buckets when you're retraining your habit brain to become naturally thin, is because you teach your brain to only think about food when you're hungry. You teach your brain to only want food that serves you, and you teach your brain to automatically stop eating when you're satisfied by making those decisions in advance and then eliminating anything else as a choice. And then knowing that the only thing between you and that follow through is allowing the emotion that your habit brain gives to you in that moment, but by then still continuing to follow through on those naturally thin decisions. And then your habit brain gets to go to work to make that just your automatic way of thinking and being. And this skill of making decisions in advance and knowing how to follow through on them and trusting yourself to follow through on them transcends to so many areas of your life. I have talked about this before on the podcast, briefly, I think, but I can put anything on my calendar and I know it's as good as done. I recently put on my calendar, I had a few hours where I'm like, I just blocked off my calendar and I said, okay, there were a few phone calls I needed to make. I knew they were going to take a while. Like I needed to call our health insurance company. I needed to call a couple of our investment accounts and get some tax information together for our CPA. So I had these 3 different things I needed to do. And listen, I hate this stuff. I knew I was going to dread it. I was like, I woke up that morning. I was like, oh, really? Do I have to today? This sounds terrible. Like, I don't want to do these things. I want the result of having them done, but I don't want to sit on the phone. I hate talking to the health insurance company. Every time it's like an hour or 2 and it's like I'm on hold and I have to talk to like 10 different people, right? Like I was experiencing so much dread, but I made that decision in advance. I put it on my calendar because I knew I wanted it to be done. Right. So my brain was like fighting me all morning with so much like, annoyance and dread and resistance to doing it. But rather than fighting with that, rather than negotiating with myself, I'm like, no, I made a decision in advance. I know and I trust myself to follow through on that decision because I know the only thing between me and following through on that decision that I had already made is simply allowing the dread in my body, allowing the anxiety in my body, allowing the annoyance in my body. And here's the thing, when you know how to allow those emotions in your body without fighting them, I wasn't exhausted by the end of those couple of hours on the phone. Allowing emotions isn't the same as shoving them down and fighting with them and trying to push them away. I was like, yep, I'm just going to sit here with a vibration of annoyance in my body as I'm talking to the health insurance company. I wasn't annoyed that I was annoyed. I was just like, yep, I'm just calmly annoyed right now. Well, I'll say that with a caveat for the most part. I think there was at one point I got really annoyed and there was an FU that came out with my frustration maybe got the better of me there. But for the most part, I was frustrated, I was annoyed, and I was calm with it. And by the end of it, I wasn't like, oh, I just need a nap. So this skill of making decisions in advance and having the freedom of knowing you're going to follow through on them is so important and critical to having your habit brain become naturally thin again, but it also has so many benefits beyond that in so many other areas of your life. And this really is how you trust yourself around food no matter what. Because your habit brain becomes naturally thin again. And then you get to end the obsessing and the micromanaging and the counting and all of the craziness. But also in this rewiring process of making your habit brain naturally thin again by developing the skill of making decisions in advance and then having the freedom of knowing you're going to follow through on them, it's also how you know how to be in control of your habit brain. by allowing whatever emotion comes up in the moment and then using that skill to tap right back into your prefrontal cortex to be in your naturally thin headspace. Friends, when you have the freedom of knowing that you can always trust yourself around any food, no matter what, there is so much, not just freedom, but calmness and peacefulness that comes with that. When you know you can trust yourself, it's how you never need to obsess or count or micromanage ever again. So if you're ready to do this, to have your habit brain become naturally thin again, make sure you join us in the Naturally Thin for Life program. It is how analytical minds learn to trust their bodies again so that you can reach your naturally thin weight and stay there easily and effortlessly so that your habit brain's thinking is by default naturally thin thinking. All right, my friends, I hope you all have a great week. I will talk to you next time. Friend, if you are loving what you are learning here on the podcast, you have to come check out my Naturally Thin for Life program. It is my on-demand lifetime access program where I teach you brand new concepts not taught here on the podcast. And I will walk you through exactly how to implement all of the tools I teach you here so that they become just a part of you. You will learn exactly how to understand your specific brain and your specific body so that you become naturally thin for the rest of your life and you no longer struggle with your weight. Inside of the Naturally Thin for Life program, you can also receive live help so that you consistently make progress and reach your goal. I will teach you how to accelerate your naturally thin journey in a sustainable way so that the change becomes permanent. The best part is that it's risk-free. You either love it or I will give you your money back. If you are ready to finally be naturally thin for life, join us at lauradixoncoaching.com/work with me. That's LAURADIXON coaching.com and click on the Work With Me tab. I cannot wait to see you there.